Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing the Late Scholar Lu Meng Let's Talk Lore series with episode 5 titled Facing Cao Cao. Now last time we ended as Lu Meng secured his position and future after impressing his new boss Lu Su with his surprising transformation into a warrior scholar. And for the next few years, Lu Meng and his lord Sun Quan would slowly shift their attention away from the Jin province in the west to instead focus on their northern borders with Cao Cao in the Yang province. This shift started when Liu Bei and Sun Quan farther cemented their alliance through a political marriage between Liu Bei himself and Sun Quan's younger sister, Lady Sun. And while Liu Bei was just a minor warlord on the run from Cao Cao at the onset of Battle of Chibi, by the end of 209, Liu Bei had greatly increased his own standing, as while Zhou Yu's forces were busy fighting Cao Ren in the Nan commandery in the north, Liu Bei easily took control of the four southernmost commanderies of the Jin province in Wuling, Changsha, Guiyang, and Lingling, without much resistance at all. The main reason for the ease of Liu Bei's conquest when compared to the year-long struggle that Zhou Yu had was because the four administrators of these four commanderies in Jin Xuan for Wuling, Han Xuan for Changsha, Zhao Fan for Guiyang, and Liu Du for Lingling all had previously worked for Liu Biao. So with Liu Biao's eldest son, Liu Qi, now working for Liu Bei, and given Liu Bei's past relationship with Liu Biao, it did not take long to convince these four administrators into surrendering their commanderies to Liu Bei directly. And with Liu Bei's rise and Cao Cao's fall, even bandits who were previously being actively suppressed and hunted by Cao Cao's troops in the nearby commandery of Lujiang flocked to join Liu Bei's side, as one bandit leader in Lei Xu brought over 10 to 20,000 troops and civilians from Lujiang to join Liu Bei's ranks at the end of 209. And it is under this backdrop that Sun Quan decided to elevate his existing alliance with Liu Bei into one backed by a political marriage. Then in the very next year, with Zhou Yu's sudden death due to the lingering effects of the arrow wound suffered while taking the Nan commandery from Cao Ren, Zhou Yu's plan for the conquest of the Yi province also had to be put on hold. So when Liu Bei approached Sun Quan with the request to borrow the Nan commandery in order to plan for his own invasion of the Yi province, Sun Quan ended up agreeing to his new brother-in-law's request on the condition that Liu Bei would return the Nan commandery once the conquest of the Yi province was complete. And with this agreement in place, Sun Quan effectively removed himself from the Jin province affairs, freeing him to first project his powers south into the distant Jiao province, where its governor, Shi Xie, had previously been a vassal to Cao Cao. Now, Shi Xie was quite pragmatic, as he would quickly shift alliances to become a willing vassal to Sun Quan after seeing Cao Cao's defeat at Chibi. And with this development in place, Sun Quan was convinced in 211 by his advisor Zhang Hong to move his capital farther downstream on the Yangtze River to a place known as Shitou or the City of the Rock, which at the time was only a mere fishing village. Sun Quan would complete his move to this unassuming fishing village in 212 and build his new capital there that would eventually bear the name of Jianye, meaning to build a dynasty, symbolizing his ambitions. Today, the city is known as the city of Nanjing, meaning the southern capital. Now, there were many reasons for moving the capital to Jianye, and chief amongst them is Cao Cao's ramp-up of military presence in the city of Van in Lujiang. In as early as 212, Cao Cao had sent an officer from Lujiang in Xieqi to establish Tuntian military farms on the outskirts of the Van city. And from these farms, Xieqi gathered a local population as farmhands and conducted raids against unprotected positions on Wu's side. In response, Lu Meng was first sent to try to persuade Xieqi into flipping sides as a turncoat. And when Xieqi refused, Lu Meng responded in force with targeted military raids against Xieqi's Tuntian farms. And unable to hold off Lu Meng's attacks, Xie Qi retreated with some of his troops, leaving behind many of the gathered farmhands, and Lu Meng was able to capture these farmhands as spoils of war and bring them back to Sun Quan as slave labor for their own Tuntian farms, as Sun Quan also relied heavily on these military-run farm systems for producing the necessary food needed for the army. In January of 213, things heated up on this northern front when Cao Cao personally launched an offensive campaign against Sun Quan with 100,000 troops. Unprepared, the forward coastal outpost at Rushukou would be quickly overran, with its commanding officer in Gongsun Yang captured as a prisoner of war. In response, Sun Quan rallied an army of 70,000 to answer Cao Cao's attack, and with their naval advantage, Sun Quan was able to quickly blunt Cao Cao's attack in a quick naval exchange that resulted in the capture of roughly 3,000 of Cao Cao's troops, as another 1,000 or so perished in the cold, frigid waters around Rushukou. Now, with Cao Cao's initial advance halted, this campaign would become essentially a standoff. And during this standoff, Lu Meng wisely suggested the construction of a concealed military dock at Rushukou that would go on to pay dividends in many future campaigns. Eventually, with spring approaching and the water set to rise in the Yangtze River and its many tributaries, which would greatly favor the Wu Navy, Cao Cao decided to accept Sun Qian's peace talk, as Cao Cao would pull back for the time being. But Cao Cao's ambitions on this front would persist, as in early 214, Cao Cao attempted to rebuild the farms near Van City, as the local administrator, Zhu Guang, was ordered to increase farming production and output in anticipation of continued military operations in the area. At the same time, to throw Sun Quan off the scent of this buildup, Cao Cao also bribed Shangyue bandits in the commandery of Puyang, just across the Yangtze River, to stir up trouble and position themselves as possible informers and spies against Sun Quan's forces in potential future campaigns. Yet by May of 214, Lu Meng had astutely identified the threat of Zhu Guang's buildup in Van City and reported this directly to Sun Quan. Agreeing with Lu Meng's assessment that more farms means more food, and more food means more troops, Sun Quan will launch a preemptively naval strike against Van City, utilizing the rising water levels caused by a fortunate period of heavy seasonal rain. Yet once their forces arrive at the well-fortified city of Van, Sun Quan was once again stumped with the question of how to take a fortified city. While most of the officers suggested the traditional strategy of building a dirt ramp that would negate the walls, Lu Meng became the lone voice to argue against this conventional but slow method. Lu Meng argued that they simply do not have the time for dirt ramps, because if the seasonal rain stopped and water levels started to drop in the tributaries of the Yangtze River, then they would be faced with the conundrum of either giving up the siege to retreat while their ships could still navigate these tributaries, or stay for extended siege without being close to their ships, as the ships would have to sail back to the Yangtze River once the water level started dropping in these tributaries. This obviously created problems for their supply lines and exposed them from being attacked by Cao Cao's reinforcements. Instead, Lu Meng believed that they need to ride their momentum immediately, and just try to scale the city walls in a direct assault using makeshift ladders and ropes. And to lead this direct assault, Lu Meng volunteered Officer Gunning for the vanguard duty of scaling the wall, while Lu Meng and his best retinue units would follow directly behind in support. And as always, Sun Quan approved Lu Meng's plan, as the very next day, at the first crack of sunlight, Gunning and his retinue charged headfirst into the walls of Wan City. Lu Meng followed closely behind with a drum strapped to the side of his body, so that he could personally strike the drums as a way to signal the charge and boost everyone's morale. And before breakfast time was over, Gunning and his unit had successfully scaled the city walls after taking heavy casualties, clearing a way for Lu Meng and his unit to follow behind. Once inside, they fought their way to gain control of the city gate, which once open, allowed Sun Quan's remaining troops to rush in and take the city. So, in just one morning's time, the city of Van was lost as Zhuguang and tens and thousands of troops and civilians would be captured as new slave labor for Wu. General Zhang Liao, who was in charge of the nearby garrison of Hefei, was just on his way to reinforce Van when the news of this defeat arrived, prompting Zhang Liao to turn his army around, as from this point on, the control of the north bank of the Yangtze River would remain largely in Sun Quan's hands going forward, setting up the conditions for the future showdowns at Hefei. And in the aftermath of this battle, Lu Meng was given the highest honors, as Sun Quan would name Lu Meng as the administrator of Lujiang. All the troops and horses captured would be assigned directly to Lu Meng's retinue, and a decent share of the spoils, as well as 600 households worth of Tuntian farming income from Lu Meng's jurisdiction of Xunyang, would all now go directly to Lu Meng, as this battle once again solidified Lu Meng's stature within Sun Quan's army. And with these series of successes, Sun Quan's ambitions only grew. So when news of Liu Bei's conquest of the Yi province reached back to Sun Quan in 215, Sun Quan naturally wanted his piece of the Jin province back from Liu Bei, especially considering that Liu Bei was also now no longer his brother-in-law, following a mutual separation between Liu Bei and Lady Sun in 211, after 2 years of unhappy marriage, and Liu Bei's most recent marriage in the Yi province to Lady Wu. So when Liu Bei refused, Sun Quan responded with war, and the man to lead this war would be none other than Lu Meng. And to find out Lu Meng's initial campaign against Liu Bei, come back next time as we'll continue our series from here tomorrow. Hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or simply support the channel by leaving a comment below, or just by hitting the like button. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!